The day began in soft hues of promise. Sunlight spilled gently across the cream walls of the Whitaker estate, filtering through the arched windows and dancing over polished oak floors. In the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon-laced pancakes mingled with blooming gardenias. Naomi Carter's subtle tribute to their wedding day 5 years earlier, when she had carried a single white gardenia tucked behind her ear and whispered vows with trembling lips under a wisteria-draped arbor. She had risen early before the ocean breeze stirred the linen curtains or Logan's deep breathing turned to wakefulness. There was joy in the way she measured the batter, poured it in concentric swirls, and waited for golden edges to curl just right. It was the joy of a woman who, despite everything, still believed in rituals, still believed in him. In them. The dining table had been set with delicate intention heirloom china, a small bouquet of peonies, his favorite, not hers, and two white candles that had seen them through late-night work arguments and quiet reconciliations. Naomi wasn't a woman prone to sentiment, but today was different. Today was sacred, until it wasn't. The vase cracked before the silence did. 1 second it stood elegant on the edge of the marble counter. The next it lay in a glittering explosion at Naomi's bare feet. Shards sparkled like fallen stars, and among them, the scattered petals of peonies lay like a prophecy. She barely flinched, only blinked once, her hand tightening around the dish towel she was holding, the delicate tremble in her fingers, betraying an unraveling she hadn't meant to begin yet. From the hallway, heels clicked with unwavering authority, slow, deliberate like a metronome, ticking down to heartbreak. Vivian Whitaker entered the kitchen without hesitation, dressed in tailored slate gray, her silver hair swept into a chignon, so precise it seemed carved. The kind of woman who never apologized for walking into rooms she was not invited into, nor for silencing joy with a single raised brow. 5 years, she said flatly, her gaze sweeping over the broken glass and the untouched breakfast. And still no child. I imagine the silence in this house is deafening. Naomi knelt slowly, retrieving pieces of the shattered vase. The edge of one cut across her palm, blood, blooming bright against the towel she used to wrap it. She didn't wince. Pain had long since become familiar. From the hallway, Logan's voice rose like a question half-formed. Mother. Naomi didn't look up, didn't plead. She'd learned long ago that her worth in this family was conditional, contingent on performance perfection, and above all, procreation. I've tolerated this charade long enough. Vivian continued, placing a folder of documents on the kitchen counter, like evidence in a trial Naomi didn't remember agreeing to. Infertility is not a character flaw, but wasting 5 years on false hope is. This family requires legacy, not lullabies of maybes. Naomi stood then tall, despite the blood seeping through her towel. Legacy built on cruelty is no legacy I want to be part of. Her voice was calm, but something inside her, something sacred, shifted. Logan entered barefoot in slacks and a rumpled linen shirt, eyes still swollen with sleep. And for a second, Naomi thought he might rise, might speak, might remember who he was before pressure turned him into porcelain. But his silence was louder than Vivian's condemnation. The papers sat on the counter like a thunderclap. Vivian smiled. Not smug, not triumphant, just satisfied. I've given you everything, Logan, and I won't watch you throw it away for a woman who can't give you the one thing that matters. It wasn't the words that undid Naomi. It was Logan's hand resting on the edge of the countertop, not moving, not defending, not reaching for her. She turned away, stepping over glass and dreams alike. In the hallway, the family portraits looked down with silent judgment. A legacy carved in stone. But Naomi, flesh and fire and bone, knew now that she would never belong among them. Not because she wasn't enough, but because they never truly saw her. As she reached the bedroom, the lavender scent of the pancake still hung in the air, like a ghost. And when the door closed behind her, it did so with a finality that none of them would yet admit. Outside, the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and endings. Some stories begin in soft candlelight and end in firelight. But some, like Naomi's, begin again in the ashes. If this chapter moves something in your heart, I invite you to stay for the journey. What comes next will surprise you, stir you, and maybe heal something too. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Who are you rooting for? What do you think Naomi should do next? Like this episode if you believe in the strength of women who walk away from what no longer serves them. Follow the channel so you never miss the next twist in Naomi's fight for love, dignity, and a future her children can be proud of. Because sometimes leaving isn't the end, it's the beginning. Tanawa. The rain arrived that night, not with fury, but with the slow, methodical rhythm of grief. Naomi sat alone in the dim bedroom that once held laughter in its corners and quiet intimacy between its walls. The room now hollow bore witness to a woman unraveling carefully, gracefully, like silk coming undone at the seam. She had barely moved since closing the door behind her, still dressed in the soft satin robe she'd chosen that morning, the one she used to wear on weekends when Logan would sneak behind her at the stove and kiss her shoulder. She now clutched it tighter like armor against what she could not yet name. The bloody dish towel still wrapped her palm, a crude bandage for a wound that no longer mattered compared to the one widening beneath her ribs. She pressed her hand against her lower abdomen, not for comfort, but for connection. The place where her body, after 5 long years of disappointment, had whispered its first yes. She hadn't told Logan, not yet. 3 weeks earlier, she'd stood in the ensuite bathroom with trembling hands and 2 pregnancy tests balanced on the marble sink. The first had confirmed what she didn't dare hope. The second had insisted it was true. Pregnant. A word she'd only said in her prayers, never aloud. A dream she'd let drift into the distance when round after round of silent miscarriages and failed IVF had stripped her of hope and dignity in equal measure. But this time had been different. No hormones, no clinics, no sterile white rooms. Just her and Logan and a quiet night in February when their love had found breath again, if only briefly. She hadn't told him because she wanted it to be real first. Wanted to wait until the doctor's appointment, until the heartbeat, until she was sure. But now, what was there left to share? The man she had trusted with her soul had betrayed it in silence, signed his name to her undoing, allowed his mother's cruelty to become law. Naomi pressed harder against her belly, as if to shield the tiny life or lives growing inside her from the world outside that was already proving too dangerous, too cruel. The storm rolled softly outside the windows, a hush broken only by the occasional crack of thunder, as if the sky too was grappling with all it couldn't hold. In the morning, Naomi rose before dawn. She dressed slowly, deliberately, as if she could layer strength over sorrow. A simple gray sweater, soft jeans, and her favorite ankle boots. She packed a single suitcase, the one her grandmother had given her when she left for architecture school, and filled it only with what belonged solely to her sketchbooks. Rolled drawings, a framed photo of her and her late father, her grandmother's quilt. Every designer dress Logan had ever gifted her, every piece of jewelry from his family's heirloom chest she left untouched in the closet like abandoned promises. Downstairs, the scent of the burnt pancakes still lingered faintly. The table remained set for celebration, untouched, a ghost of joy that had never arrived. Naomi didn't say goodbye. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter beside a folded piece of stationery. Her handwriting was even strong. Logan, there was a time when I believed we could survive anything. That love once rooted deeply enough could weather betrayal, silence, and even grief. But I was wrong. You didn't choose me, not when it counted. And now I have something to protect that you will never understand until it's too late. Don't try to find me. And if you do, come only when you're ready to fight, not just for me, but for the family you signed away. Naomi. She didn't cry. There were no theatrics, no farewell glances. Only the sound of her keys on the granite counter, the click of the front door, and the fading echo of boots on stone. Outside Newport lay quiet under gray skies. Naomi's car waited in the private garage, its back seat already packed. She paused only once before pulling away her fingers, drifting unconsciously to her abdomen. The life growing inside her felt like the only thing still tethering her to something bigger than herself. 2 hours later, she crossed the Rhode Island line into Massachusetts, driving along the jagged coastline toward a town she'd only ever seen in pictures. Willow Bay. It was supposed to be quaint, with clapboard cottages and friendly farmers markets. She had rented a small house there, sight unseen. It was enough. Enough to start over. The road curled along the ocean waves, crashing far below as cliffs rose like guardians to her grief. Naomi rolled down her window, letting the salt air sweep into the car. It caught in her curls, stung her eyes, and tasted like something ancient and holy. By the time she reached Willow Bay, dusk had dipped the town in bronze and lavender. The cottage was exactly what the listing had promised, small, weather-beaten with blue shutters that sagged like tired eyelids. But it faced the ocean, and the garden, though overgrown, smelled of rosemary and resilience. Inside, the floor creaked with familiarity. The fireplace was cold, the furniture sparse. But Naomi set her bag down and stood in the center of the room like a woman claiming sanctuary. She exhaled slowly. Then for the first time in weeks, she smiled not for joy, but for resolve. Naomi didn't know what the months ahead would bring. She didn't know if she could carry the pregnancy to term. Didn't know if the world could ever become soft again. But she knew this. She would not be destroyed by the same silence that had nearly unraveled her. There was life inside her, a future, a secret, and she would protect it with everything she had. The envelope waited in the center of Logan Whitaker's desk like a loaded question. It was cream-colored, thick, expensive, sealed with a red wax emblem that bore the Whitaker family crest, a lion holding a sword. Legacy in wax. A threat in silk. Logan had stared at it for nearly an hour, unable to touch it, unable to walk away from it. Outside his office window, the Newport harbor was quiet beneath a blanket of winter fog. Yachts slept in their slips, seagulls floated without effort, and the morning light came reluctantly, as if even the sun wanted no part of this. He ran his hands through his hair for the 10th time, jaw tight, eyes rimmed red. His mother's words echoed inside him like ghosts in cathedral walls. This family needs heirs, not sentiment. She will ruin you. You're the Whitaker name now. That comes with a price. He hadn't answered then. He'd stood in silence while Vivian's voice laced around him like a noose. And afterward, when she left his office with a satisfied smile and a promise of tidying up the narrative she had left behind the envelope. Inside, he knew were divorce papers, drafted by the finest lawyers in Boston, polished airtight, designed to be painless, at least for her. Vivian had taken care of everything, even the generous settlement, the house, Naomi's car, a trust fund disguised as compassion. She had thought of it all. Because Vivian believed there was no wound money couldn't disinfect, no betrayal that couldn't be justified if the family name came out unscathed. And Logan, narrowing of seconds, he had done nothing. Naomi's voice haunted him. That soft plea in the kitchen, barely audible over the sound of her heartbreaking, tell her to leave. He hadn't. He hadn't told his mother to leave. Hadn't followed Naomi upstairs. Hadn't explained the hesitation etched across his soul because he wasn't sure he understood it himself. Now she was gone. No text, no note, no sign of where she had gone or if she would return. Only the ring. He found it that morning sitting on the marble kitchen counter next to a folded piece of paper that held a message as quiet and final as snowfall. He hadn't cried then. Not when he read her words. Not when he imagined her driving away alone, possibly pregnant, though she hadn't said the words aloud. He'd simply pressed the ring into his palm until it left an imprint and stood frozen in the kitchen where she had once danced barefoot on Sunday mornings. He had always loved that version of Naomi, the woman who smiled like a secret and worked like a force of nature. She had been his balance, his grounding, and now she was his punishment. A knock at the door jolted him back to the present. His assistant's voice filtered through the intercom. "Mr. Whitaker, your mother is here." Of course she was. Vivian swept into the room with the same control she wielded in courtrooms, charity galas, and family dinners alike. Her hair was flawless, her heels unforgiving, and her lips painted the color of intimidation. "Have you signed them?" she asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Logan didn't answer. Vivian's gaze moved to the envelope untouched and then back to her son. "This is the cleanest way, Logan. She leaves with more than enough. You walk away with your future intact. Your father would have done the same." Logan stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "My father loved with his whole heart." "Your father built an empire," she snapped. "You're confusing affection with legacy. That girl, she doesn't understand what it means to protect a name. You were always too soft with her. Logan crossed the room to the windows, his eyes scanning the fog. She was my wife. Vivian's heels clicked across the floor, drawing closer. She was a mistake. Beautiful, ambitious, yes. But she would have dragged you down eventually. Her father's business was a house of cards. Do you really think the press won't dig that up? Do you want her past to become your downfall? Her past is her own, Logan replied, his voice taut. And it's not your weapon. Vivian exhaled sharply. You're still clinging to the fantasy. She's gone, Logan. She made her choice. You need to make yours. Sign the papers. He turned, then facing his mother fully. You made sure she'd leave. Vivian didn't deny it. She was never right for you. You know that. Logan walked back to the desk and stared at the envelope. His name was written in his mother's script, looped elegant final. He picked it up, thumb tracing the wax seal. For a moment his breath caught. Then deliberately he broke it. The paper slid out in a soft whisper. He scanned the first page. The legal language blurred. His hand trembled. There was a note, typed, cold, Mr. Whitaker. The agreement outlines the dissolution of marriage between you and Ms. Naomi Carter. Please review and return with signature. Funds will be transferred upon filing. Preston Walsh and Associates. He held the pen in his right hand, poised. This was the moment, the choice. But he wasn't choosing between a woman and a legacy. He was choosing between fear and love, between survival and courage, between silence and the voice that had always whispered from the back of his mind, fight for her. Vivian watched him in silence, her expression unreadable. The pen touched the paper, and Logan Whitaker signed. When he was done, he placed the ring on top of the folder and pushed it across the desk. Vivian smiled with restrained triumph. You've done the right thing. Logan didn't reply, because deep down he wasn't sure. Outside, the fog began to lift. Somewhere along the coast, a woman carried a secret that would rewrite his future. And in the stillness of that moment, Logan realized something far more terrifying than losing his name. He had lost her, and he might never be worthy of finding her again. To say you're in it. The sky over Willow Bay was the color of ash, layered with soft clouds that promised either a quiet afternoon or a storm that would come without sound. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of her new porch, wrapped in a knit shawl that once belonged to her grandmother, watching the wind roll in from the sea. It had been 4 days since she'd arrived. 4 days since she had become someone entirely new, without knowing how or when the transformation had truly begun. No one in Willow Bay knew her name yet. Not really. She'd signed the lease under NC West West, being her mother's maiden name, and the initials enough to keep questions minimal. People in small towns were curious, but rarely unkind. And for now, that was enough. The cottage creaked like an old soul, its paint peeled in places where salt had long ago claimed victory, and the shutters flapped when the wind turned aggressive. But inside it was safe, still. Her womb was no longer the only thing trying to house something fragile and growing. Naomi's days were quiet now, an odd kind of silence that echoed rather than weighed. She would rise with the sun hands pressed over her belly, not yet swollen, but already known. She boiled oats in the morning, scribbled designs into her sketchbook at the table, and walked the coastline when her legs felt steady enough. She had no client, no timeline, and no man in the next room making her feel like a guest in her own home. And yet, sometimes in the blue hour of the evening, she missed the hum of the espresso machine in Logan's office. The way he used to call her Stormlight when she laughed at his worst jokes. The way he used to trace circles on her back when he thought she was asleep. The man who had chosen silence over defense still haunted her, but now she wore that memory like armor. Not to shield herself from what had been, but to remind herself of what she would never return to. She had walked away, and the ache of that decision pulsed more deeply than any of her physical changes. Naomi had never been the woman who ran. She was the one who stayed, who fought, who reasoned until her breath ran out. But she'd come to understand too late, maybe, that staying sometimes cost more than leaving ever would. She remembered packing the car, a whisper of a kick in her belly, like a secret shared between just the two of them. She had whispered promises into her palm. I will keep you safe. I will give you peace, even if it means I do it alone. On the second morning in Willow Bay, Naomi met Aurora Mills. It happened at the market, if you could call it that. Really, it was a converted barn near the main road where locals brought vegetables, honey, and gossip. Naomi had come in for ginger root and chamomile tea. She didn't expect to be seen, not yet. Aurora, however, was the kind of woman who saw things that weren't yet visible. You're not from here, she said, not with suspicion, but with a curious kind of warmth. No, Naomi replied, her voice low. I'm passing through. Aurora's gaze lingered just a second too long on Naomi's abdomen. Her smile softened. Some journeys take longer than others. Naomi didn't answer, but she nodded, and somehow that was enough. Later that day, Aurora arrived at her cottage with a basket of fresh bread and a tiny jar of something amber-colored. Apricot preserve, she explained. Good for the soul and the stomach, especially a stomach that's preparing for change. Naomi blinked, startled. I never said. You didn't need to. Aurora's voice was gentle, not intrusive. I was a midwife for 30 years, honey. There are things I know without anyone saying a word. Naomi looked down. Her hands for once were still. She let the door fall open wider. Come in then, just for a minute. It was the first time she'd let anyone cross her new threshold, and the first time she'd spoken aloud the truth that had lived in the shadows since Newport. I'm pregnant, Naomi said, the words falling softly, reverently. With triplets. Aurora didn't gasp or blink or rattle off questions. She simply smiled, reached for Naomi's hand and held it. Well, she said, a stormlight woman indeed. That night, Naomi sat in her bedroom, a single candle lit on the windowsill, the preserves untouched beside her. She wrote in the leather-bound journal she had kept since her wedding day. The pages inside were filled with inked dreams, home designs she had drawn for Logan's eyes only, and lists of baby names they had once shared in whispers at midnight. Now the pages held new words. 3 lives grow inside me, and not one of them deserves to know silence as their first language. I will raise them with truth and kindness and strength. And if Logan ever finds his way back to us, he will meet a woman who does not need him to complete her, only to honor her. If he cannot do that, he will remain a stranger. Outside, the sea roared gently. Naomi leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like years, let herself feel proud, not for surviving heartbreak, but for walking away from a life that would have kept her small. Because sometimes leaving was not the end of love. It was the beginning of self-respect. The sea spoke in syllables only the lonely could understand. Each wave lapping against the rocks behind Naomi's cottage came with a rhythm that echoed her own, slow, persistent, and unyielding. There was no dramatic crashing against the cliffs, no tempest announcing its presence, just the quiet, steady thrum of existence. Much like her, Naomi Carter had found herself becoming a creature of ritual in this new life, not because routine dulled the pain, but because it gave her days shape, a container for the sorrow, the strength, and the cautious hope blooming in her womb. The cottage nestled at the edge of Willow Bay's windswept coast had once belonged to an elderly painter who had long since traded sunsets for silence. The walls still smelled faintly of turpentine and old dreams. Naomi didn't mind. She painted with different tools, now her mind sketching blueprints, her fingers brushing over growing curves, her whole body becoming an artist of life itself. Most mornings began with tea brewed in an antique kettle that wheezed before it whistled. She would sit on the front steps, wrapped in wool hands cupped around warmth eyes trained on the horizon. The sea never disappointed her. It offered no answers, but always showed up. The people of Willow Bay had accepted her in that slow, deliberate way that only coastal towns seemed to know, watchful at first, then warmly curious. The grocer called her ma'am with a respectful nod. The librarian offered a worn copy of a parenting book, just in case you're the reading type. The owner of the coffee shop remembered she preferred honey over sugar, but it was Aurora Mills who came most often. She never lingered too long, never asked too much. Sometimes she brought soup. Other days she brought silence, simply sitting beside Naomi on the steps, as the wind tangled their shawls and the gulls cried overhead. Did I ever tell you about my first delivery, she asked one morning, eyes soft with memory. Naomi smiled faintly. You mean the first baby you brought into the world? Aurora nodded. She arrived backwards, screaming with her hand by her cheek like she was already ready to fight the world. A pause. That's how I know a strong one when I see her. Naomi looked down at her hands, the faint swell of her stomach beneath the knit fabric. I don't feel strong, she whispered. Of course not, Aurora replied. Strength isn't something you feel. It's something you leave behind when everything else falls away. There were still nights Naomi woke in a sweat, fingers reaching for a body that no longer slept beside hers. In the pitch black, Logan's absence became a hollow presence. Not just in the bed, but in the future they had once charted together. She would remember his voice murmuring about baby names, his obsession with calling a daughter Elowen, the sound of him laughing in the nursery they never finished. But by morning the grief would dissolve into motion. And motion, Naomi had learned, was mercy. She began to draw again on napkins, on scraps of old grocery paper, on the back of bills she no longer feared. Sketches of spaces made to heal shelters that embraced both beauty and breath. The town's tiny community center had a bulletin board where local announcements were tacked in crooked rows. One day, Naomi pinned a note of her own: architect available for local projects, sustainable design, compassionate rates, contact NC West at 14 Cliffside Lane. She expected nothing. But the next afternoon, a man in a denim jacket and windburned cheeks knocked on her door. His name was Dean Hollis, the town's unofficial handyman and reluctant mayor of all things unclaimed. You're the new girl with the pen and the eyes, he said. We got a library roof that's been leaking since '09. Think you can draw us something dry? And just like that, Naomi's world began to shift. Work came in trickles: a porch renovation for a single mother, a sunroom design for a grieving widower, sketches for a greenhouse behind the elementary school. Her fingers found purpose again. Her back ached with satisfaction, not sorrow. Her pregnancy began to show, slight at first, then impossible to ignore. Every night she would whisper to her unborn children, "Today we saw kindness. Today we planted something. Today I didn't think of your father until after lunch." The days were far from easy. Morning nausea clung to her like shadow. Her energy waned faster. The reality of raising 3 children alone pressed in like fog. There were moments she sat on the floor, hands bracing her belly breath, shallow with panic. But then she would remember the cottage by the sea, the way it held her without judgment, the way the windows welcomed every sunrise and the floorboards never complained beneath her feet. It didn't ask for her past or pity her pain. It simply stayed, just like she was learning to do. One evening, as spring crept over the coastline and the lilacs began to bloom wild along the fence line, Naomi stood barefoot in the backyard with her hands cradling her stomach. The sky was a watercolor of soft gold and dusky rose. The waves spoke in rhythm, and within her life fluttered in a new language faint kicks like tiny drum beats of resilience. I don't know who will be, she whispered to the wind, but I know I will be enough. The sea answered only with silence, but somehow Naomi knew it agreed. In the weeks that followed Naomi's disappearance, Logan Whitaker learned that silence could echo. It echoed in the marble hallways of his estate, in the way his footsteps no longer met another's in the morning. It echoed in the untouched half of the bed, in the hollow sound of his espresso machine sputtering for no one. Her voice no longer floated through the rooms. Her laughter, soft and sun-warmed, was gone, and with it every part of the man he thought he understood. He walked through the house as though it were a museum of a life recently ended. Her scarf still hung on the coat rack by the door. Her mug, painted with tiny constellations, remained in the cupboard, positioned just right. There was no final slam of a door, no suitcase wheeled down the marble steps. Only absence. A quiet so total it devoured breath. And the letter. He read it every night, folded and worn. Now the creases softening as if trying to blur her words. You didn't choose me, not when it counted. Don't try to find me. And if you do, come only when you're ready to fight. Logan hadn't known what it truly meant to grieve until he lost someone who still breathed. He tried to throw himself back into work. His assistant kept his schedule busy with board meetings, quarterly reviews, investment briefings. But Logan found no solace in data sheets or projections. Nothing in those sleek conference rooms felt real anymore. Not when he kept glancing at empty chairs, half expecting her to be seated there, sketching something brilliant while pretending not to listen to the jargon. He couldn't tell his colleagues that the woman they barely tolerated had been the only tether keeping him human. Vivian visited less frequently, though her absence was no comfort. Her influence still lingered in every curated piece of art, in the sterile perfection of his surroundings, in the way the staff never looked him directly in the eyes anymore. One evening, Logan sat alone in his study, the fire casting a tired glow across the room. He nursed a glass of scotch he hadn't really tasted and stared at the fireplace mantel where a photograph of him and Naomi stood. It was taken on their second anniversary during a trip to Maine. She had windblown curls and wind-chapped cheeks, and he was looking at her, not the camera, like she was the only real thing in the world. He picked up the frame and pressed his forehead against it. "I let her walk away," he murmured. But the truth was heavier than that. He hadn't fought for her. He had let silence do the talking, allowed fear to take the wheel, and listened to legacy over love. In the days that followed, Logan began to dismantle the life he'd built for everyone but himself. He stepped down from the board, sold his shares in the firm his father had spent decades grooming him for. It caused headlines, speculation, even phone calls from old colleagues panicked by the power vacuum. But Logan didn't flinch. For the first time, the noise of the outside world faded behind the beat of something quieter, something truer. He returned to their old apartment downtown, abandoned but not sold still, echoing with their earliest days together. He swept dust off the hardwood floors, lit candles in empty rooms, and sat for hours with Naomi's old drawings spread around him. Hospitals with skylights, libraries with curved ceilings designed to cradle sound, shelters with windows low enough for children to look out of while sitting. Her work was never just about beauty, it was about healing. And Logan realized she had been trying to build a sanctuary in every space she touched, even when her own heart was under siege. One morning before the sun rose, Logan stood in front of the mirror, a decision taking form behind his tired eyes. If Naomi was building a new life, he would find a way to build something too. Not for her, he had lost the right to claim that, but for the children she might be carrying, for the version of himself he still hoped to become. He left the city the next day, with only a duffel bag and the address of a small construction company along the coast, one that offered modest wages and took on community-focused projects. No cameras, no press, no legacy. Just labor. The foreman, a stocky man named Hank, took one look at Logan's callus-free hands and raised an eyebrow. "You ever used a hammer for anything but hanging art?" "No," Logan admitted, "but I'm a fast learner." Hank had grunted. "We'll see." Logan started from the bottom. He hauled timber, mixed cement, and scrubbed paint off old shingles. His muscles ached in ways that boardrooms had never prepared him for. He wore boots that gave him blisters and gloves that didn't always protect him from splinters. But at the end of the day, he slept. Truly slept. His hands, once suited for signing checks and giving directives, now bore cuts and grit and a strange sense of peace. He didn't miss the curated silence of wealth. He missed Naomi, and that ache was constant. Each evening after work, Logan would return to the small rental cottage he'd taken by the bay. He would light a lamp, sit by the window, and write letters to Naomi, to the children he didn't know if he would ever meet. "I don't expect forgiveness," one letter read, "but I hope someday when you ask why I let you go, I'll have built enough with these hands to show you I didn't stay lost." He didn't know if she was still in Rhode Island, didn't know if she was still carrying the pregnancy, didn't even know if she would ever want to see him again. But Logan knew this. He was no longer building for legacy. He was building to become a man worthy of love, even if the only hands that ever held it again were his children's. The storm arrived without warning, an April tempest that swept over Willow Bay with wind like a whip and clouds that churned as if mourning something ancient and unspoken. Naomi Carter stood in the kitchen of her cottage, one hand braced against the counter, the other pressed hard against her lower back. Rain lashed the windows. The sky groaned. And inside her body, something was shifting, loosening, like the first crack in a dam long held. The twins had been active all morning. Her belly, once just a curve of hope, had become a symphony of motion, but now the movements had slowed, giving way to pressure, rhythm, pain that wasn't sharp but certain, a pull deeper than discomfort, a call. Naomi had known this moment would come. She just hadn't expected it now. Not yet. It was too soon. 34 weeks. The doctor had warned of the risk. Carrying 3 children, even for a woman in peak health, was always a dance with the edge. But Naomi had carried them with grace, eating well, resting, when she could, working with the slow wisdom of someone who'd already had to rebuild herself once from the ground up. She'd come to believe they'd wait, that her body would hold, that she'd have more time. But nature is never a thing that obeys hope. A hard wave of pain tore through her, this one sharper, deeper. Naomi gasped and dropped the mug she'd been holding. It shattered across the tile floor, and she gripped the counter tighter, her knees buckling slightly. She couldn't do this alone. Not tonight. Not in this storm. Her breath came shallow now, her vision blurred at the edges. Lightning flashed beyond the windows, illuminating the outlines of the sea, wild and foaming against the rocks. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay, babies. Just hold on." She shuffled toward the hallway, grabbing the cell phone off the entry table. Her fingers fumbled with the screen. Aurora Mills was the name she tapped. No answer. A second try. Still nothing. Of course. The storm must have downed the lines or cut the cell tower's reach. Naomi cursed softly, a thin sheen of sweat rising across her forehead. She tried to step outside, but the wind howled like a living thing. Sheets of rain made the porch a sheet of glass. The path to the car shimmered with water, impossible. She couldn't drive in this. Not with her body in revolt. Not with her vision doubling and her breast growing shallow. Another contraction seized her. She fell to her knees. And then, like the final blow, a sound. Not from her, but from within. A sudden warm gush of water down her legs. Her water had broken. Panic bloomed. No one knew she was in labor. No one knew she was alone. No one except perhaps God or fate knew that Naomi Carter was about to give birth to 3 children on the floor of a cottage by the sea, with only the sound of the storm and the ghosts of old dreams to keep her company. She crawled toward the bedroom, dragging herself across the wood now slick beneath her knees. Her breath came in heaving sobs, each contraction closer than the last. Her body, once the site of so much betrayal and rejection, was now the battlefield of survival. Every inch of her trembled, and still she moved. She made it to the foot of the bed and slumped against it, head tilted back toward the ceiling. Her eyes fluttered shut, a tear sliding down her cheek. But she wasn't afraid. Not exactly. Because something deeper than fear had taken hold. A primal knowing. You were made for this. You carried them. You will bring them forth. Then through the dark a sound. Not thunder. Not wind. A knock. At the door. 3 sharp raps. Naomi blinked, dazed. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. She couldn't rise, could barely speak, but she forced one hand toward the nightstand and dragged herself toward the hallway again. Each movement came with searing pain, her body urging her to push, but her mind refusing. She reached the front door, leaned against it, and with the last thread of strength, she had unlocked the bolt. The door blew open with the wind, and in the storm's mouth stood a man soaked to the bone eyes, wild chest heaving. "Logan." "Naomi," he gasped, stepping forward, arms instinctively reaching for her as she collapsed into him. Her lips moved, breath trembling. "How?" "I followed Aurora," he whispered, voice thick with rain, "and something else, something breaking. She told me. You stopped coming to your appointments." She was worried. Naomi could barely hold her head up, but her voice rasped out, desperate and raw. "They're coming." Logan caught her as her knees gave way again, lifting her into his arms with a strength powered more by fear than muscle. He carried her to the bed, murmuring to her, smoothing damp hair from her forehead. "I've got you. I'm here. I'm not leaving." Her eyes fluttered. "You left once." A pause, a long aching pause. "I did," he said, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But not tonight. Tonight I stay." He found towels, boiled water, remembered things from old books, from films, from stories his mother had told when she wanted to sound humane. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. Naomi, through the storm of pain and disbelief, saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Not guilt, not pride, but reverence. As the night deepened, so did the labor. Logan held her hand through every contraction, whispering promises not of forever, but of now. Promises that he would not run. Not this time. Hours passed like years. And then, a cry. Small, piercing, alive. Then another. Then one more. Three. Three perfect cries. Naomi wept. Logan wept. The storm began to ease, the wind no longer howling but humming. They had come, and Naomi, battered, breathless, but triumphant, looked into the faces of her children, each placed gently on her chest by the man who had once broken her heart and was now trembling, holding the pieces together. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. In the dim light, the sea still roared. But inside that cottage, something softer was born. A beginning. Krr. The morning after the storm was quiet in the way cathedrals are quiet after a prayer. Light filtered through the salt-streaked windows of the cottage like a benediction, falling in gentle shafts upon a bed now crowded with the miracle of life. Naomi lay half-propped on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and sea air, her skin luminous with exhaustion. But her eyes were open, soft, watchful. She was watching him. Logan sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, his fingertips gently brushing one of the baby's impossibly tiny hands. He hadn't spoken much since the final cry of the third child last night, as if words might disturb the fragile peace that had settled like a veil over them. There was blood on his shirt, his hands were scraped raw, but he hadn't left her side, not even once. Naomi studied the man who had once been her husband and now knelt before her like a penitent. In the dim hush of the room, surrounded by newborn breath and the faint rustle of the ocean outside, Logan looked more like a boy who had walked too long in the dark, and Naomi didn't know whether to reach for him or to let him drift. One of the babies stirred Elias, she thought, and Logan instinctively adjusted the blanket, his movements awkward but careful. She watched the way his fingers trembled when the infant's head nestled into his palm. The gesture was almost unbearable in its tenderness. "You didn't ask their names," Naomi said quietly, her voice hoarse but clear. Logan looked up. His gaze met hers like a question suspended in air. "I thought I might not have the right." Naomi turned her face toward the window. The sunlight touched her cheek, and for a moment she looked like something half divine. Then she said, "You earned something last night. I don't know what to call it yet, but it was real." He swallowed, his voice came low. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I know. I came because I couldn't keep breathing and not know if you were okay. If they were okay." And then Aurora called, and suddenly I wasn't breathing anymore. Naomi nodded slowly. For a while they listened to the rise and fall of the baby's breathing. The smallest one, Isla, let out a contented sigh, her tiny mouth forming a shape that reminded Naomi achingly of her own. "They're all different," she whispered. Logan smiled, a trembling thing, just like their mother. A beat passed. Naomi sat up, slightly grimacing, and Logan reached to help her, but stopped himself short. She noticed. "Glass," she said quietly. He looked at her, confused. "We used to be glass," she explained. "You could see through me, and I thought I saw through you. But then I realized glass can reflect too. We see what we want, not what's really there." Logan exhaled, "And now we're flesh, bruised, torn, scarred in places." She turned toward him. "But real. And bleeding doesn't scare me as much as pretending anymore." He reached for her hand slowly, almost reverently. She didn't pull away. "I can't change what I didn't do," he said. "I didn't protect you. I didn't stand up for us. And I let my silence become your abandonment." Naomi's fingers brushed his. "Yes." He winced. But she added, her voice softening, "You stayed last night. You caught your daughter with your bare hands. You whispered to our sons like they could already understand you." Logan's eyes filled, and he didn't blink them away. "I don't know what that means for us," Naomi continued, "but I know what it means for them. They have a father who's trying, and that matters." "I don't want to disappear again," he said hoarse. "Even if you never wear that ring again, even if I never deserve to." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached behind her and pulled out a small velvet box from the nightstand. It had sat there since the day she arrived at the cottage, buried, but not discarded. She opened it slowly, revealing the ring he had placed on her finger 3 years ago, under a sky strung with fairy lights and naive promise. She held it in her palm. "I kept it," she said, "not because I was waiting for you, but because I needed to remember who I was when I believed love could change us." Logan stared at the ring as if it were an artifact of another life. "I still believe that," he whispered. Naomi looked at him long and steady. "I believe in change," she replied, "but not without pain and not without truth. I'm ready for both." She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. "We'll see." Then she placed the ring back in the box and tucked it away. They were not beginning again. They were not pretending the past hadn't shattered them both. But in that room between glass and flesh, between rage and redemption, a new kind of truth settled in. Not romantic, not perfect. Real. The babies began to fuss gently, their tiny limbs shifting, their voices soft and uncertain. Logan stood and moved instinctively, reaching for them, like he'd done it all his life. Naomi watched him, and for the first time in months, her chest didn't tighten at the sight. Instead, she breathed. Slow, deep, full. Outside, the sea glittered in the morning light, endless and unbroken. Inside, three tiny lives slept between two people no longer made of glass. Naomi stood at the kitchen sink as twilight spilled across the coastline, like ink from a tip bottle staining the sky in bruises and gold. The wind from the ocean came gentle now, brushing against the porch beams and slipping through cracked windows, soft like a memory you hadn't yet decided whether to keep or let go. Inside the cottage, all three babies slept. For now. It had been 5 days since the storm. 5 days since Logan caught their daughter with trembling hands. 5 days of shifting boundaries and emotions. Naomi didn't know how to sort, much less speak aloud. She had told herself she wouldn't let him stay, that she wouldn't make room for a man who'd once made her feel so invisible she'd vanished herself. But the truth, thick and unwelcome, hung in the cottage like sea fog. Logan had stayed. He had risen with her at 2 a.m. when Isla cried, and Naomi's body couldn't rise fast enough. He had warmed bottles, changed diapers with the precision of a man who didn't know what he was doing, but would break himself trying to do it right. He had learned the rhythms of the cottage, memorized where she kept the burp cloths, and which song calmed Elias faster than a pacifier. And every night after the baby slept, he made tea. 2 mugs, one with honey for her, always placed quietly by her side. No questions, no pleas, just presence. But presence wasn't always peace. Naomi found herself drifting through the days like a woman caught in her own reflection, watching from the inside of her body as old wounds rubbed raw against new tenderness. She didn't hate him. That would have been easier. She didn't love him either. Not the way she once did, boundless, breathless, undone. What she felt was stranger, a kind of longing wrapped in wariness, affection heavy with the ghost of betrayal. There was a distance between them. Not physical, he moved in the same rooms, breathed the same air, but a space made of unspoken words. And Naomi had always believed that silence, if left unchecked, grew teeth. That night, after the twins had drifted back into slumber and the cottage hummed with the soft hush of new life, Naomi stepped out onto the porch. The sky was deep blue now, dotted with stars, the wind quiet. Logan joined her a moment later, tea in hand. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. Didn't want to. He handed her the mug. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief but electric in its restraint. For a while they stood without speaking. The sea murmured below them, and somewhere far off a dog barked once then again. Finally, Naomi said, "We should talk about it." Logan turned his head slightly. "About the babies?" "No," she said. "About us. About the space between now and what we used to be." He nodded once slowly but didn't speak. Naomi sipped her tea, then continued. "When I left, I wasn't just running from silence. I was running from the woman I had become, one who begged for your attention like it was air, one who let your quiet kill her one day at a time. I know," he said, voice thick. "I see her now, and I hate what I did to her." She looked at him, eyes glassy but not cold. "Do you see me now?" Not the woman who carried your children, not the one who labored on hardwood floors, just me. I do, Logan whispered. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Fiercer. More beautiful than any version I ever held in my head. Naomi laughed softly, the sound brittle. Words come easy after regret, Logan. He flinched but nodded. You're right. And if all I can do now is stand here, speak the truth, and let you decide what's next, then that's what I'll do. A gust of wind blew across the porch, lifting Naomi's curls. She closed her eyes briefly. You know, she said, opening them again, I named them before I knew if I'd ever see you again. Logan's breath caught. Will you tell me? She nodded. Elijah, she began, her voice quiet, reverent. For the boy who kicks hardest, he'll lead, even if it's stubbornly. Isla for the girl who came first. She's all fire and grace. And Ezekiel for the quiet one, the one who listens before he cries, like someone else I used to know. Logan let out a breath, something like a sob. They're perfect. They're pieces of me, she said softly, but they carry your shadow too. He didn't ask if that was a blessing or a curse. Naomi set her mug down, folded her arms across her chest. I'm not ready, she said, to forgive, to start over. I don't even know what starting over would look like. I'm not asking for anything, Logan replied. Not now. Maybe not ever. I want to be the kind of man you don't have to run from. Naomi turned toward him, then her gaze clear. Then don't disappear. Don't try to fix it all in one day. Just be here. Be real. Be flawed. I can do that. They stood in the hush again. And Naomi realized that naming the distance between them wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an offering, a boundary traced in truth, not bitterness. A way to say, this is how far I had to go to find myself, and this is how carefully you'll have to walk to meet me again. The sea kept whispering. The stars held their place. And inside, between walls that had witnessed both labor and love, 3 tiny hearts beat on tethering them to something that defied names altogether. Not forgiveness, not romance, not yet, but maybe, just maybe beginning. Heartbroken. The scent of sawdust had become Logan's second skin. It clung to his collar, settled into the folds of his jeans, dusted his boots with the quiet pride of honest work. Most days began before sunrise now, with the sound of gulls crying overhead and his breath clouding in the cold coastal air. There were no tailored suits, no chauffeur waiting, no ivory towers lined with strategy meetings and glossy conference tables. Only a tool belt slung over his shoulder and the creak of lumber waiting to become something useful. He liked the ache that bloomed in his shoulders after a full day's work. It was clean pain earned. It didn't whisper of regret or guilt. It didn't drag him back to the boardroom where he once watched his marriage slip away in increments of silence. It didn't ask him to speak, it asked him to build. And for the first time in his life, Logan Whitaker was learning how. The local crew had accepted him with the wary tolerance reserved for outsiders, especially wealthy ones, with soft hands and spotless boots. Hank the foreman rarely spoke more than a sentence at a time, but on the 3rd week he handed Logan a thermos of coffee and muttered, "You're still here. That counts." It did. The men taught him how to sand evenly, how to listen for the right tension in a frame, how to swing a hammer without breaking your own thumb. They teased him when he got it wrong. They slapped his back when he got it right. There were no pretenses, no polished smiles, just wood sweat and quiet camaraderie. At night, Logan returned to the cottage, hands blistered back, sore heart unexpectedly full. Naomi allowed him to stay in the guest room. Temporary, she said, but he treated it like sacred ground. He cooked dinner when she was too tired, folded laundry without being asked, kept the dishes clean and the floor swept, and above all, he showed up for the children. Diaper changes, midnight feedings, lullabies hummed with surprising pitch. The babies began to turn toward his voice. Isla's fingers curled around his thumb like she owned it. Elijah quieted when Logan held him close to his chest. Ezekiel often slept best when Logan sat beside the crib and whispered stories from books Naomi didn't remember unpacking. The cottage once Naomi's fortress began to pulse with something warmer. Not comfort, not yet, but stability, a sense of shared purpose. She watched him from the doorway, sometimes a baby in his arms, a bottle in one hand, the other bracing a sketch of a playground he was helping build for the town's community center. His brow furrowed with concentration, his lips murmuring words to the infant he rocked. And Naomi felt something shift. This wasn't the man she married. This wasn't the man who'd chosen silence over devotion, prestige over protection. That man had been crafted from legacy, a sculpture of inherited expectation. This man was made of labor, and labor she'd learned could shape things far more lasting than legacy ever could. One night as the fire crackled and the children finally slept, Logan sat beside her on the couch, their bodies not quite touching. He was sketching. Naomi peered over his shoulder. The lines were clean but imperfect, the proportions a little rough, but the concept was unmistakable. A shelter. Not just a building, but a place. Designed for women and children. Curved walls for privacy, skylights for warmth, a garden blooming in the courtyard, and in one corner a tiny nursery with murals of stars and sea creatures. She stared. "You drew this?" she asked, voice low. He nodded, cheeks flushing. "I've been watching you, not just as their mother, as you, the architect, the woman who sees healing as something you can build with your hands." Naomi didn't speak for a long time. Then gently, "You never saw that before." "I never looked before," Logan whispered. "I saw what I wanted, a wife to fit beside me, not a woman who might challenge everything I was raised to believe." He set the pencil down. "I don't want to build empires anymore," he said. "I want to build places that hold people." Naomi's throat tightened. "Why now?" He looked at her, not blinking. "Because the first time I held our daughter, she looked at me like I was already someone worth trusting, and I realized I didn't want to disappoint her the way I disappointed you." Tears welled sudden and unwelcome. Naomi turned away, wiping them with her sleeve. "You're changing," she murmured. "But change doesn't erase pain." "I know," he replied. "I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm just trying to become the kind of man who deserves to be part of your story again, even if it's just as the father of your children." Naomi closed her eyes. His words didn't promise love. They promised effort. And effort for once felt enough. The next morning she rose before dawn, slipping quietly into the living room, where Logan was already tying his boots. She handed him a wrapped bundle of bread and apple slices. "For lunch," she said softly. Logan paused, taking it from her with careful fingers. Their hands brushed, but neither pulled away. "Thank you," he said. Naomi gave him a small smile. "For showing up." As he left the door closing gently behind him, Naomi stood for a long moment in the hush of the cottage. The baby stirred in the next room. The sea whispered outside. And in her heart a question pulsed, not of whether she still loved him, but whether perhaps the man she once loved was finally learning how to stay. By the time spring had fully melted into summer, the cottage began to hum with the quiet rhythms of a new kind of life. Less survival, more symphony. Each day was a series of repeating notes, feedings, lullabies, diaper changes, the soft creak of floorboards under tired feet, the hush of sea air drifting in through gauzy curtains. But within that loop of tasks, Naomi found strange comfort. Each repeated act was a kind of devotion, each ordinary moment a brushstroke on a canvas of something fuller than before. Logan was no longer a guest, nor was he a husband. He had become a fixture, a presence that existed without taking up too much space. A steady shoulder when exhaustion made Naomi's knees buckle at 3 in the morning, a murmured voice reading to the babies in a room lit only by starlight. He never asked for more, but Naomi saw the ache in his eyes when she passed him in the hallway, when she brushed his hand by accident, when she laughed with the twins, and he watched as if he didn't dare join the joy too loudly. He had changed, but grief still clung to him. Not for the past, but for all the versions of the future he would never get back. One evening, Naomi was searching for a pacifier when she noticed something odd tucked beneath the floorboard near Logan's cot in the guest room, a stack of pages folded neatly and tied with twine. She hesitated. The trust between them was brittle rebuilt, slowly and delicately, and she had no desire to fracture it. But something about the way the papers were hidden, not discarded, but tucked away like something too sacred to share, drew her. She untied the bundle and unfolded the first page. It was a letter. To Elijah, Isla, and Ezekiel. I don't know if you'll ever read these. Maybe one day when you're old enough to hate me or question me, or wonder why your mother flinched the first time I said your names aloud. You were born in a storm, a real one with thunder and rain, but also a storm I'd helped create. I wasn't there when your mother needed me most, not during the months she carried you in silence, not when she whispered her hopes into your bones. But I caught you when you arrived. All three of you. My hands were shaking and my heart was split wide open. You were slippery and loud and utterly perfect. I wept for every second I had not deserved you. Naomi blinked back tears. Her hands trembled as she reached for the second letter. To Elijah, you were the loudest, the first to cry, the first to teach me that strength isn't always quiet. I see your fists in the air like you already know you were born to fight. I hope I teach you to fight for the right things. To Isla, you arrived first, but your cry came second. You looked at me with eyes too knowing for a newborn, and I swear I saw your mother in every line of your face. I think you'll be the one to hold people together just like she does. To Ezekiel, you didn't make a sound at first. I panicked. But then you yawned like the world was no big deal. I envy your calm. I think you'll be the kind of man who listens before he speaks, the kind who knows the power of stillness. Naomi swallowed hard, her thumb brushing over the ink. Logan's handwriting had always been neat, precise. These letters, though, were a bit messier, words scratched out, margins filled. Like they had been written through tears or sleepless nights. She kept reading. To Naomi, there's no version of this letter that doesn't begin with "I'm sorry," but I've learned that sorry is a seed. It only grows when watered by action. I see you now. Not the version of you I sculpted in my mind, but the woman who carried 3 lives alone and still sings them to sleep like her heart hasn't cracked 1,000 times. I love you. I probably always will. But I won't say it aloud unless you ask. And if you never ask, I'll keep showing up anyway. Because loving you now means letting you choose whether I get to. The last line undid her. Naomi sat down on the edge of the cot, the bundle of letters in her lap, her breath caught in the hollow space beneath her ribs. A part of her wanted to storm into the kitchen, where Logan was wiping down bottles, and confront him, not with anger, but with every emotion she had tried so hard to keep locked behind practicality and time. But another part, the quieter, braver part, knew these letters weren't meant for confrontation. They were offerings, soft prayers folded into pages, truth laid bare without expectation. So she placed the letters back beneath the floorboard where he had hidden them. Not because she was hiding her knowledge, but because she understood now. Some confessions are not meant to be echoed aloud. That night, Naomi didn't say anything. But when Logan passed her in the hall and offered his usual gentle nod, she didn't just return it. She touched his wrist, lightly, a pause, her eyes on his. And something passed between them. Not permission, not yet forgiveness, but a whisper from the cradle of all they had created. I see you too. And it was enough. For now, separate return. The morning light poured across the cottage floor in golden threads, wrapping itself around crib legs, stacks of unfolded laundry, and the forgotten mug of coffee cooling beside Naomi's elbow. The twins were fussing in tandem while Ezekiel gurgled peacefully in his swing, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside the woman who had brought him into this world. Naomi's fingers worked instinctively, buttoning Elijah's onesie, wiping Isla's chin with a practiced flick of the wrist. Her body had grown into the rhythm of motherhood, like a dancer reclaiming her muscle memory, but her heart was a house with too many locked rooms. Behind her, Logan's footsteps were cautious. They had been for weeks. Every gesture was gentle now, every conversation laced with awareness, as though he were afraid one wrong syllable might send them both tumbling backward. He hovered in the doorway. I made breakfast, he said softly. She didn't look up. Thanks. Thought we could sit outside. It's warm. Naomi didn't respond. She wrapped a soft blanket around Isla and placed her carefully into the crib beside her brothers. The girl squirmed for a moment before sighing into sleep, her tiny fists relaxing against her cheeks. Only then did Naomi turn. Logan held a tray with 2 plates, warm biscuits, soft eggs, slices of fruit cut into stars, the way Naomi used to for her nieces. His attempt at familiarity was almost painful. Still, she followed him. They sat on the porch steps, the sea stretching out before them like an unfinished promise. Gulls traced invisible lines in the sky, and the horizon pulsed with sun-kissed possibility. Logan cleared his throat. Do you remember the cabin in Vermont? The one with the crooked door and the fireplace that never worked? Naomi glanced sideways. You mean our honeymoon that turned into a survival exercise? He chuckled. Yeah, that one. She smiled faintly, but her guard didn't lower. Logan shifted, slipping a hand into his pocket. Naomi felt the air change before she saw the small velvet box. Her body stiffened. He opened it. The ring inside wasn't the same one he had given her all those years ago. This one was simpler. No diamonds. No dazzling platinum band. Just a soft gold circle with 3 small birthstones embedded along its curve, blue, pink, and green. For the children. Naomi stared at it in silence, her fork forgotten. I didn't come back with a plan, Logan said, and I didn't imagine this moment would happen like this. I've watched you carry this family. I've watched you rebuild yourself. And somewhere in that watching, I started dreaming again. Naomi's gaze stayed on the ring. I don't want the past, he continued, his voice low. I want the woman in front of me now, the one who didn't need me, but let me stay anyway. The one who sings lullabies with cracked lips and lifts her chin even when she's breaking. He placed the ring between them, not in her hand, on the step. I know I don't deserve yes, but I needed you to know I would ask. Naomi sat frozen, the sea crashing behind her, the baby sleeping inside and every cell in her body screaming with memories she had worked so hard to make quiet. Finally, she spoke. Do you know what it cost me to leave you? Logan's face shifted. No, he said, but I've tried to imagine it every day. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, she whispered. I left because I couldn't love myself and stay. She looked at the ring. Her hand didn't move. You think because you've shown up and built a crib and drawn a shelter that it erases the silence, that it undoes the nights I curled around my own body and begged for one word from you. No, he said, I don't think that. I don't need a proposal. Naomi continued, her voice rising slightly, not angry but real. I need consistency. I need to know you'll be here when I say no. I need to believe you can love me without needing a ceremony to validate it. Logan swallowed. I want to marry you, he said, but I don't need to. Not if it makes you question everything we've rebuilt. Naomi stood slowly, picked up the ring, not to accept it, but to hold it in her hand. Weigh it. This is beautiful, she said, voice softening. But this is your gesture, not mine. Logan nodded, eyes shining. Tell me what yours would be. She hesitated. Then, mine would be sitting on this porch every day for a year, not asking for more than what we already have. It would be washing bottles side by side without promises. It would be letting silence pass between us and trusting it doesn't mean distance anymore. She looked at him, her voice trembling. It would be letting love grow slowly, like sea glass, tumbled, weathered, real. A long silence fell between them. Logan reached for the ring, closed the box, slipped it back into his pocket, not as rejection, but as understanding. And Naomi, for the first time, felt her chest open, not wide, not reckless, but just enough to let a new breath in. She turned to go back inside, pausing at the door. You can stay, she said quietly, as long as you understand what staying means. He met her gaze. No guarantees, no shortcuts. No ring, she whispered. Not yet. Logan smiled. I'll be here, without it. And as she disappeared into the house, Naomi felt something loosen inside her. Not the knot of hurt, not the shadow of betrayal, but the certainty that she could choose her own timing. That love didn't need to come wrapped in velvet. Sometimes the truest proposals were the ones that asked for nothing in return. Srinawasan. The cottage was no longer just Naomi's sanctuary. It had become a shared rhythm, a humble architecture built on footsteps at dawn and lullabies, past midnight, soft laughter in the kitchen, and the quiet weight of a man who had learned how to take up space without overpowering it. Logan had not proposed again, and Naomi had not asked him to leave. They lived in the soft, unspoken arrangement of a family not defined by vows, but by presence. No one called it love out loud, not yet, but it stitched itself into the corners of their days, in the way Logan brushed the curls from Isla's forehead, in how Naomi passed him the warm bottle without looking, knowing he'd be there with outstretched arms. The town began to notice. It was hard not to, with the way Logan had thrown himself into community projects. He rebuilt the playground by the church, helped fix roofs after a late summer storm, and taught teenagers how to read blueprints with a surprising patience that made the older men nod in quiet approval. He was different here. Gone was the sleek man from the city boardrooms, the one who once believed legacy was something you inherited, not something you carved with your hands. Now he was a man who sat in the back pew on Sundays, bouncing two babies while Naomi took a moment alone in the garden after service. A man who showed up to town meetings and listened before speaking, who could rock a baby with one arm and stir stew with the other, who remembered the names of every mother at the shelter and built shelves that wouldn't tip no matter how hard a child climbed them. Naomi watched him closely, not with suspicion anymore, but with the cautious eyes of someone witnessing something rare. Transformation rooted not in grand apologies, but in quiet reinvention. And yet she wondered, was this new Logan born from love or guilt? One afternoon, while the children napped and Logan worked on the back fence, Naomi walked out with two lemonades and a question she had buried for months. He looked up from the post. He was straightening his shirt, damp from the sun, a smudge of dirt across his jaw. "Break?" she asked. He nodded, accepting the drink. They sat under the fig tree, its branches casting dancing shadows across their skin. Naomi took a breath. "Do you ever miss it?" Miss what he asked, though she knew he already understood. The life you left behind, the office, the wealth, the name. Logan took a long sip before answering. "I used to. And now?" Sorry. "I think I miss the illusion of it more than anything else," he said. "I miss believing I mattered just because people stood when I entered a room." Naomi tilted her head, and here, he smiled, not self-deprecating, but with a quiet certainty. "Here no one stands. They hand me a baby and tell me to sit down and change a diaper. And somehow that feels more like mattering than anything ever did before." She nodded slowly, watching the way his eyes stayed on hers, unflinching. "Do you think you've changed?" she asked softly. "I know I have," he said. "But I also know that change doesn't mean I deserve a second chance. It just means I finally understand what I lost." Naomi's gaze dropped to her lap. "You didn't just lose me, Logan. You lost the woman who would have said yes without needing to see the proof first." He didn't respond right away. "Then and I'll spend the rest of my life proving, if that's what it takes." She looked up. "I don't need you to prove," she said. "I need you to live it, to raise them, to meet them where they are every day, to fail in front of them and get back up. I can do that." "Good, because that's what family looks like now." They sat in silence for a while. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of lavender and salt. In the distance, the babies stirred inside the cottage. As they stood, Naomi placed a hand gently on Logan's chest. "I don't need a husband right now," she said. "I know. But they need a father. I want to be that. And She hesitated. "I'm learning to want you again, not for who you were, but for who you are becoming." A flicker of something bright hope perhaps crossed his face. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Logan rocked Ezekiel while humming a tune Naomi had sung in the early days. She watched him from the hallway, his head bent close to their son's, his hands large but impossibly gentle. He didn't look like a man who had sacrificed everything. He looked like a man who had finally discovered what mattered most. And Naomi, stronger now, sharper, wiser, realized that perhaps it wasn't about second chances at all. Perhaps it was about becoming new people for a new story, a new man, for a new family. And maybe, just maybe, the rest could come after. It came not with shouting, not with a storm, but in a quiet envelope slipped beneath the door. Naomi found it early one morning, just as the sun began to paint the walls of the cottage in rose and gold. The babies were still asleep. Logan was out on a sunrise run, something he'd taken to in the past few weeks, a practice of breath and rhythm that seemed to clear the haunted corners of his mind. The envelope bore the familiar seal of a law firm from New York. Her fingers froze around the paper. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, afraid to open, afraid to know. When she did, her eyes skimmed quickly, heart pounding until she reached the line. Finalization of divorce, complete. Naomi sat down. The air inside the room shifted. It wasn't sadness that overwhelmed her. It was finality. A door that had once swung in the wind open and uncertain had now clicked shut. No ceremony, no audience. Just ink on paper, and a woman sitting barefoot at a wooden table, feeling the shape of her life change once again. She thought she might cry, but no tears came. Instead, she felt strangely still, as if something inside her had exhaled after holding its breath for years. The door to the past had closed not as punishment, but as mercy. Later that day, Logan returned, cheeks flushed, from the run eyes bright. He held a bag of cinnamon rolls from the bakery Naomi loved but rarely visited now. He placed them on the counter with an awkward grin. "You were asleep when I left," he said. "Thought you might need a sweet start." Naomi smiled faintly, but her gaze drifted toward the envelope on the table. Logan followed her eyes. He didn't ask. Instead, he moved slowly, sitting across from her. "Is it?" he began, but didn't finish. She nodded, final. He inhaled, nodded once. "Okay." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the soft cooing of Isla from the nursery. "I thought I'd feel broken," Naomi said finally. "But I don't." Logan's eyes softened. "You're not broken. You never were." "No," she agreed. "But I carried something for a long time, a version of us that wasn't real anymore. I think I needed the paper to set it down." He reached across the table, not for her hand, but to slide the cinnamon rolls closer. "Then we let that chapter rest." Naomi nodded, unwrapping one, the smell of sugar and warmth curling into the space between them. Logan didn't try to offer apologies or ask what it meant for them now. And that restraint, that respect, was what made Naomi's chest tighten in a different way. After breakfast, she took the envelope, folded it neatly, and placed it in a small cedar box tucked at the back of the bookshelf. Not hidden, just archived. Later that afternoon, she took the babies on a walk by the cliffs while Logan fixed the loose gate at the end of the property. Naomi loved watching the waves crash against the rocks, wild and unapologetic, like the woman she was still learning to become. She paused at a bench overlooking the sea, all three babies dozing in their stroller, the wind tugging at her hair. Her fingers brushed the edges of her coat pocket where she had placed a small note written to herself the day she left Logan's penthouse over a year ago. She had found it recently crumpled in the back of an old journal. It read, "When the time comes, don't return to the same house expecting it to become a home. Build something new, even if it's small, even if it's slow." She smiled now, folding the note again. The final door had closed, but in its place, windows had opened. That evening, Logan stood at the edge of the nursery, watching as Naomi sang softly to Ezekiel. Her voice was low, almost a hum, her sway instinctive. She didn't look up when she felt his gaze, but she said quietly, "You're not my husband anymore." A pause. "But you're still the father of my children. And more than that, you're here. I see what that costs you, and I respect it." Logan stepped in, careful not to break the moment. "I don't want to change what we are," he said. "Only honor it." She turned toward him, Ezekiel asleep against her chest. "You already are." And for the first time in a long time, Naomi realized something profound. Love doesn't always arrive in gold bands or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it lives quietly in the space between a closed door and an open heart. Sometimes it waits on porches, fixes broken gates, and carries babies without needing thanks. And sometimes it isn't love reborn. It's something new, something steadier. The final door had closed, but a new home, unfinished, unspoken, unpromised, was already being built in its place. Sonny, the cottage, once tucked away like a forgotten note in the folds of the sea cliffs, had become a kind of compass, pointing not north, but inward. It no longer felt like a place Naomi had fled to. It felt like the place she had chosen. The babies were growing. Elijah now crawled with wild, determined urgency. Isla babbled with operatic drama, and Ezekiel studied everything with quiet, philosophical eyes. Each of them carried a piece of her, and somehow a piece of Logan, to the best of him, not the man she once fled from, but the one who had arrived in the storm and stayed through the quiet. The garden bloomed with surprising generosity. Tomatoes spilled from their vines, basil and rosemary perfumed the summer air, and the roses she had once neglected now climbed eagerly up the trellis. Naomi spent her mornings barefoot in the soil, her hands in the earth, while Logan built raised beds along the fence, a sun hat always crooked over his messy, wind-tossed hair. They lived simply. No declarations, no rings, no contracts or promises carved in gold. And yet every gesture was a vow. Each cup of tea left waiting on the windowsill before dawn. Each diaper changed without a word. Each time Logan danced with Isla in the middle of the living room, no music playing except the squeals of her laughter. They had rebuilt something. Not a marriage, but a home. And in that home, Naomi had begun to feel the slow, unmistakable blooming of trust again. It came not all at once, but in steady pulses, like the tide, like breath. One evening just before sunset, Naomi found Logan on the porch sketching. He had a habit now of drawing the day's softness. The way Ezekiel's hand reached out in sleep. The curve of Naomi's smile when she thought no one saw. Even the shadows of the fig tree as they danced across the porch in the golden hour. She stood behind him silently and peeked. This time he had drawn the cottage, but not as it looked now. It was larger, expanded, with light spilling from wide windows. There were wind chimes, a wooden swing, even tiny footprints carved into the walkway. A second porch stretched across the back where Naomi imagined they'd one day host friends, or maybe women from the shelter. She planned to help rebuild women who, like her, once needed refuge more than rescue. He looked up at her unsure. Too much. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. This, she said, softly tracing the sketch. This is exactly enough. A breeze passed between them, soft and salted. And for the first time, Naomi didn't feel like she was holding her breath in his presence. She was simply breathing. There was no longer a need to label what they were. Love had returned, yes, but not as it was before. This love was weathered slower, deeper. It had walked through grief, shame, forgiveness, and come out the other side quieter and wiser. It was not a restart, it was a rerouting. Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the horizon melt into colors only the sea knew how to make. "Will you ever ask me again?" she whispered, not looking at him. His voice came low, steady. "Only if you want me to." She smiled. Good answer. They stayed there until night blanketed the sky, until the babies cried for one more bottle, one more lullaby. They rose together side by side, not as husband and wife, but as something perhaps more intimate, two people who had chosen to grow alongside each other after the storm. As Naomi turned off the lights that night and looked out the kitchen window toward the garden, she realized the truth: the cottage had never saved her. She had saved herself. But the cottage had witnessed it all, the undoing, the rebuilding, and now the blooming. It had become more than shelter. It had become a compass, pointing her not toward Logan, but toward herself. And now, finally, she knew the way. Sisin Katsum, dear reader, if this story moved you, if you felt Naomi's pain, her strength, her quiet triumph, if you saw a little of yourself in the way love can break and still be reborn, then this space is for you. Tell us what part of Naomi and Logan's journey touched you most. Like this story if it resonated. Follow our channel for more heart-healing tales of love, transformation, and the beauty found in the ordinary. Your journey matters too, and you are never alone. See you in the next story. With grace from the cottage by the sea.